Hey guys, and welcome back to another Woodbrew video.
In this week's video, we're building some really cool dining chairs using a very unusual material called OSB. You typically see this in home construction, but we are taking a very inexpensive material and turning it into a very cool project. We'd like to thank Georgia Pacific for sponsoring this week's video. And without further ado,
let's get started.
To start this project off, we're using a 3/4 inch OSB panel, and this actually is a tongue and groove subfloor panel, but you could use any type of material for this. This particular panel we've used in many projects before, and I'll link a couple of those in the description if you're interested to see some more cool things that you can do with this really inexpensive material. Now the first thing I'm doing is actually tracing out this massive template we have, and you can see it's kind of pieced together, and that's because I made this template to be shipped to you if you're interested in doing this project. So we cut this template on our CNC machine. If you'd like to order a set of these templates so you can make your own chairs, there's a link in the description below, as well as there's a link to a paper copy if you just want to print it out and cut out your own template, which is also another cheaper option. Now we were only able to make about 1.5 chairs from one sheet of plywood in this video, but since then I've done some more laying things out in SketchUp, and I've found out that you can make 2 of these chairs out of a single sheet of plywood 4x8. So if you are interested in making these and you do get the set of plans, I'll have a very specific way to lay these out for you so you can maximize the material. But it is a little bit tricky, and I didn't get it right by just guessing. So if you do decide to build these, I would check those out. It can make your life a lot easier. Because I am trying to maximize the use of this piece of plywood, I have to lay these out in a very tricky way to cut. So I did a lot of these stop cuts with the miter saw, kind of plunging them in and then moving forward. That's a little bit dangerous and a more advanced move. So if you're not comfortable with doing that, I would recommend sort of using the jigsaw more than the circular saw, but it's something that I've done a lot and I'm very comfortable with. And I came back and cut the little extra piece that I couldn't cut with the circular saw with the jigsaw to cut out that last little corner, and that worked out really well. This seems like it would take a really long time, but it really wasn't that bad because it was a lot of just straight cuts. I will mention that I am cutting these way oversized, about 1/4 inch all the way around these lines, and that's because we're going to use those templates to then use a flush trim router bit and bring that to the exact dimensions it needs to be in a later step. And in just a second, you will see me actually using the 2 templates because there is an inside and an outside piece to each side. And I'm just going to go ahead and pre-drill these holes in there so that I can attach these down to the side pieces when we go to trim them at the router. Now you could definitely use tape here or any other method of sticking templates down, but I found with the OSB this worked really well, and because the OSB is so scattered, it's really kind of hard to see these screw holes in the final project, and if you fill them, you definitely will never see them. So this is just a super simple, really quick way to attach these if you don't have some double-sided tape that's really good laying around. I'm then going to use a 1/2 inch flush trim router bit to go ahead and trim these to the final dimension all the way around. Now some of the areas were a little bit thicker, so I kind of had to take off a little bit first before going all the way to the template. And there's definitely some better router bit options here. Probably a spiral cutting bit would be better, but this cheaper, inexpensive bit that I'll leave a link in the description below too, it did the job really well. One thing I found that worked really well was once I had one side of the template cut, I just went ahead and used that piece as the next template. It's a little bit heftier and easier to keep around, so if you do make one of these and you find that that template is a little bit on the flimsy side for your liking, you can always just cut one out of a larger piece of material and keep that big hefty full-size one laying around if you'd like. Before assembling everything, I went around with an 80 grit sandpaper to remove all the high spots, and then went back with an orbital sander with 120 grit to smooth everything out. And you want to do that to every surface, not the edges quite yet because we're going to do that at the end, but all the top surfaces to get them nice and smooth. The first step in assembly is gluing the two side pieces together. So like I said earlier, we have an inside and an outside piece for both sides. So we're going to go ahead and glue each one of those up individually and move on to the next step. I used a couple pin nails here just to keep everything aligned before we put them in clamps. While those are drying, I'm going to go ahead and cut out the bottom piece and the back piece in a very small 2-inch stretcher that goes on the front. To give the chair a little bit more flair, I decided to cut the backrest out on a bit of an angle. So I grabbed an offcut and just made this cross cut in on about a 45-degree angle, and then went ahead and cut the rest of the square out. And what that gives me is a slightly different pattern on the backrest, and I think it kind of breaks up the chair a little bit and makes it look really nice. The templates come with a few sections that are 1/2-inch roundovers, and we're going to go ahead and use a 1/2-inch roundover bit to remove those areas on the backrest and the seat so that these pieces will fit in perfectly and will give us a nice flush trimmed look in the end. With a little bit of help from Molly, I managed to get all these pieces sort of dry fit together, and you definitely want to do this before you ever add any glue, just to make sure there isn't any spots. You kind of need to sand down a little bit more so they fit in to those little roundover sections perfectly. I waited to cut this chamfer on the backrest until I had it completely dry fit together so I knew exactly where to cut, as well as the bottom piece, just to make sure that the length was just right. This was a little bit of an oversight on my part. When I created these templates, I kind of overlooked how the stretcher would be attached, and what I should have done was I should have cut this area out so that the stretcher would fit in here really nicely like the rest of the chair goes together. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out now, but if you get the templates, this section will already be removed on that part, and all you'll have to do is put a round over on that back corner of the stretcher, and this will fit in just like the rest of the pieces. Now it's time for assembly, and I'm just going to use a bunch of glue on this chair and some pin nails to hold everything together. That's going to be more than strong enough just because of the way this chair goes together. But if you want to add in some finish head screws or dowels or anything else, that's your choice. And I think this will be plenty strong enough, but definitely wouldn't hurt to add some more strength in. With the chair fully assembled, I went back with that 80 grit sander and sanded down all the edges flush with the bottom and the backrest, and then also sanded all of the legs smooth, and then came back with the orbital sander and went to 220 grit. And then the last step is to use some penetrating epoxy. You don't have to do this, but I would recommend it only because it's really going to lock all of those chips in place and keep them from maybe fraying or sticking on fabric of clothes. We did this for the Lululemon build out, and I'll leave a link in the description below, and those held up really well, and so we went ahead and used that same method here, mixing some of that up, and we're going to do a light coat over everything to really lock all those fibers in so they don't chip out. We ended up painting one of the chairs white and leaving the other natural, and we couldn't actually decide which one we liked better, so we were hoping you guys could leave us a comment down below so that we can decide what we're going to do for the rest of the chairs that are going in our dining room. Well, that's going to do it for this project. I really love how these chairs turned out. I mean, they're super simple to make and really inexpensive and look great with our dining room table. I'd like to thank Georgia Pacific for sponsoring this week's video again, and I actually included a little bit of an extra video at the end of this video talking about Georgia Pacific and the impact that they have in our local community, and it's really a cool tour of one of their facilities. It makes a lot of the paper products that you and I use on a regular basis, so stick around and check that out. And again, big shout out to them. They pretty much make everything you need to build a house or do anything that you and I would do. So I'm sure you've used their products before, and this is one of those products that I think is really underused and is really covered up too often. I think this OSB could be implemented in a lot more projects and really does make for an interesting look. It's not very often that we get the opportunity to see how the products we use on a daily basis are made. Yesterday, we actually were able to check out a product that we use all the time. Georgia Pacific asked us to come check out one of their cellulose mills, and it just so happened to be right down the street from where we live, about an hour and 10 minutes away. It's in an area that I have grown up hunting my entire life. We actually have family friends that work at the mill, and it was just really amazing experience. So I hope you guys enjoy this little video put together, kind of explaining how the day went. This particular cellulose mill makes these massive rolls of basically paper, and these massive rolls go into products such as toilet paper, paper towels, diapers, you name it. If it's a paper product, especially absorbent type of paper product, this mill is making that. And it's really awesome to see how something's made that you really take for granted and use basically every day of your life. It was also really refreshing seeing an industry that's generally frowned upon in the environmental world being so conscious of all of their environmental efforts and actually producing more power than they can use through the process of creating this product. I'll get to that in a second. The process starts by receiving either trees or chips. Now the chips will come in via rail car, and those come from mills and other places, and basically that is waste that is now being used in paper. And if it comes in the form of an actual tree, those trees, generally speaking, are the smaller trees that wouldn't have been able to have been used for lumber. They use a crane to remove the trees from the semi-trucks and put them in this massive spinning barrel. And what that does is it removes all the bark, and they actually keep the bark for a later step in the process. The next part of the process is actually creating a very uniform chip from all of the wood and additional chips they receive. So they're actually going to put all of this wood through a chipper, and it is spit out into these massive piles. And this is where the actual pulp is going to be extracted from and is going to create the paper. In order to generate the heat needed for this process, they actually use the bark that they stripped from the trees earlier. So they're using the entire portion of the tree in this process, and the byproduct of the process is a significant amount of steam, which first is going to go through 2 turbines, and these turbines generate electricity. So much electricity that they actually produce more than they need for the plant to run, and they sell that electricity back to the grid. They estimate they're able to provide power on average to 30,000 homes in the local area, and all of this is a byproduct of their process and doesn't negatively affect the environment, which is really awesome to see a company developing this sort of process and system to not only save them money but also to be environmentally conscious. Once the product is extracted from the last process, it's actually rolled onto these massive rolls, essentially like a big piece of carpet, but huge. I think it's 22 feet long and 12 feet in diameter. And then these are then cut into the specific widths that the customer would like for their product. All of this is then loaded into train cars inside the facility and shipped internationally. It was truly an amazing process to watch happen in person. Big shout out to Georgia Pacific for having us. It was an amazing experience, and we wanted to thank you personally for all that you do in the state of Alabama. It's really awesome to see all the ways you impact our local areas for the better.